"I don't understand it," she said to Neville that afternoon. "He's not the same Stanley who first arrived on the island. I think something's up." "Oh, I don't know," Neville answered, rather dismissively. "Perhaps he's just adjusting to his new routine. I'm sure running a busy branch line comes with stress." Molly wasn't convinced, but said no more, as the two engines went back to work. Neville was late returning to Great Waterton that night. He had to collect building materials from the docks, but the boat from the mainland was delayed. By the time he arrived, darkness had fallen, and mist hung in the air. He was about to shunt his trucks away when a sound piqued his attention. "What's he doing awake?" Ouch! Neville? Oh dear, I'm sorry if I woke you. "What on earth are you doing?" I thought I'd forgotten to tidy some of the trucks for you. Silly me. Looks like I did. I'm going back to my shed now. Good night. And you say you heard another engine? Later that afternoon, Molly was at the junction as Thomas bustled in. "Hello, Molly," he smiled. "How are things at Great Waterton? Not letting my hard work go to waste, are you?" "Certainly not," chuckled Molly. "Although, there is one thing I need to ask you." She explained about Stanley's strange behavior and Neville's encounter. "I'm sorry, Molly," replied Thomas. "There were no engines left when I found Great Waterton. We did find a rusted old tender at the platform, but no sign of an engine." "Where is the tender now?" Molly asked. "Who knows," said Thomas. "At the scrapyard, I reckon. No use for it now, sadly." "Maybe that's what Stanley's looking for," cried Molly. "I must talk to him. Thank you, Thomas." Molly raced away with her passengers.
Mighty machines, big and mighty machines, working for you, doing mighty things there. Mighty machines, lifting and pulling and flying so high, building up to the sky. You can watch them all day and never know why they're mighty machines. Hear them roar, watch them soar, sit right down and see. There are stories to enjoy for every girl and boy. Mighty machines there, mighty machines.
At the sheds, the Earl gathered his group together. "My dear friends, thank you for joining me on this delightful trip. Here is Duke, who I am proud to call my engine, and prouder still to call myself his grace." Duke blushed with pride. "He has many stories to tell, and shall do so on a special service we'll embark on this afternoon. Before that, I think it best we pay a visit to the Thin Controller and thank him for allowing us this wonderful opportunity on his railway." They strode off to the Thin Controller's office. Out of earshot, George's usual grumbling began. "Ridiculous, the lot of it," he muttered. "I'm not a taxi. I should be flattening your rails. Now that would make a splendid show." "You'd have better luck flattening the pathway to the first station," retorted Duke. "The passengers have complained bitterly about it. At least you'd be doing something useful then." "Huh," retorted George. "I was built for work, not play. I suppose play is all you little toy engines ever do." Duke ignored him and went to prepare his train. One morning, Wilbert was arranging trucks to take to the chute. He noticed one sat near the back of the sidings. It looked shabby and timid. Today, however, she heard quite a commotion. Airy, the ironworks diesel, was collecting trucks of scrap bound for the smelters. He clattered around, shoving the trucks roughly. "Go on, get moving," he rumbled. The trucks were cross. They slipped on their brakes, and Airy came to a halt. "Grrr," he growled, as the trucks tittered with laughter. "They'd come quietly with a gentler touch," Emily advised, trying to be helpful. "Pah! I'm not taking tips from an antique like you. I bet you've never so much as coupled to a truck before." "I'm a passenger engine," said Emily, "but—" "Ha! You look more like a penny farthing than a passenger engine," Airy interrupted. "Just you trundle off with those bird boxes you call coaches and leave the real work to real engines." With a roar, Airy dragged the screeching trucks away. Emily was furious. "I'd like to show that diesel a thing or two," she scowled. "If only I could—" "Oh, yes! That's exactly what I'll do."
Scrambled Eggs. "The bridge across the river needs repair," the Fat Controller told the engines. "I shall have to make a weight limit across it for a while. Percy and Daisy will be all right, and Toby too, but Thomas is too heavy." Thomas looked anxious. "How would you like to go and help Edward?" suggested the Fat Controller. "Can Annie and Clarabelle come?" asked Thomas. The Fat Controller shook his head. "They'll be needed here, I'm afraid," he said. "Daisy can't carry all your passengers on her own." Percy promised to look after Annie and Clarabelle, but they were sorry to see Thomas go. To cheer Thomas up, Edward took him to see Bill and Ben, the twin engines who lived at the China Clay Harbour. "Oh dear, not another blue engine," said Bill cheekily. "First Edward, then Donald and Douglas, and now—" "Don't forget Gordon," interrupted Ben. "He came here once by mistake, so he said." "I don't think he enjoyed it much," he added innocently. The twins both chuckled, remembering.
Gordon's Hill, just beyond Edward Station, is challenging for most engines, but it is especially challenging for Derek, the new diesel on Edward's branch line. Whenever he has to go up the hill, his engine always splutters, coughs and stalls, and whenever it does, Derek gives up. Boko was often the engine that had to come and save him. "It's no use," Derek would say to him. "I can't do it. I'm a failed engine." "You just need a little push," soothed Boko. "You're alright." One morning, Derek was approaching the hill with his usual train of china clay. He stopped at the station where Edward was waiting. Derek's engine was already starting to act up. "Are you alright?" asked Edward. "Oh, I'm fine," said Derek, "but I'll never get over the hill with this engine." "Take my advice," cautioned Edward. "Don't let the hill beat you, keep going as long as you can." "Yeah, I'll try," whimpered Derek, and he tumbled away. Derek.
Percy, what are you talking about?
A ghost train. Driver saw it last night.
Where?
He didn't say, but it must have been on our line. He says ghost trains run as a warning to others. Oh, it makes my wheels wobble to think of it.
Huh. You're just a silly little engine. I'm not scared.
He can't help feeling unwell. The Fat Controller must know that, Thomas confided to Edward. You don't think he'd replace Henry, do you? The Fat Controller always gives engines a fair chance, smiled Edward. And Henry's a good sort. Even so, something must be done. Thomas gulped. Edward's remark didn't feel very reassuring. Thomas knew exactly what he was doing. He'd remembered Gordon's trick of leaving before he could be uncoupled. This time, he wanted to follow up. "I'm helping Henry! I'm helping Henry!" he smirked. Cheeky engine, fussed the coaches. "That's good, come along! That's good, come along!" he sang. "Stop! Stop! Stop!" shrieked the coaches. Was Sir Topham Hatt. "Now, you've no business running off down the main line, especially without your driver." "I'm afraid you've let yourself get carried away," chuckled Sir Topham Hatt. "I'm not sending Henry away. I'm rearranging his timetable. Now, back to the yard with you. I have disgruntled passengers to pacify," finished Sir Topham Hatt. A streak of blue. Thomas and Edward gave a splendid effort building the railway, but they weren't suited for fast mainline services. As such, the Fat Director purchased another engine called Henry. That night, Thomas retired to the shed. A vulgar discourse greeted him.
I do sympathize with the Fat Director. Wasted what little hard-earned money he had on a mite, an antique, and an invalid. I'm the real bargain. The strength of 3 for the coal and water consumption of 1. Only a matter of time before he purchases me. The Fat Director favors engines with good character. You leave much to be desired in that department. And where has good character led you, replied 87546. Certainly not the main line. Speed and strength are all that matters there. My proper name should be.
I fancy something regal.
Save your steam.
Lord
It's no
Frederick
use arguing with
Regaby
him.
has a certain charm to it. No?
The next morning, 87546 awoke to a startling sight. There was Henry, hissing and wheeshing, halfway on the turntable. What the devil is this? Oh dear! Thought the men had made me better. Well, get better and out of my way this instant. My admiring passengers are waiting. I demand extrication at once. But the other engines had all left for work. They couldn't have helped anyhow, for there was no way onto the turntable. At the top station, Percy shunted the trucks, then went to the shed. He asked his driver to back him into the far left berth. "Sorry, Thomas," he chuckled. "Looks like you'll have to brave the cold after all." "There you are, Percy," said the driver. "You can have a good night's rest, and we'll be back at it tomorrow." As Toby was at the quarry, and Thomas was taking his evening train, Percy was all alone. He glanced around the shed. "A shame Thomas won't have a comfortable sleep. Meanwhile, I'll be as cozy as can be," he thought, and drifted to sleep. As he cooled down, the last of his steam wafted from his funnel, up towards the rafters of the shed. Drip. Percy woke with a start. Something was trickling down his boiler. Drip. What on earth? He thought. Percy glanced up, and there, directly above him, was the hole. "Ooh, that Thomas! He tricked me!" His warm steam had melted the snow on the shed roof, and water was dripping all over him. He wasn't very cheerful now. With no fire to keep him warm, he shivered as the water cascaded down his boiler. Percy couldn't sleep. As the night wore on, the temperature dropped, and his wet boiler began to freeze. Bother! He shivered. When Thomas and Toby returned the next morning, they laughed and laughed. There was Percy, teeth chattering and nose tinged blue. A thin layer of ice shimmered on his boiler. "Found a nice warm spot, did you?" smirked Thomas. "I hope Firelighter comes soon," grinned Toby. "I feel cold just looking at you, Percy." "Come now, Toby," chuckled Thomas. "What's a little cold weather to us steam engines?" Percy didn't reply. Suffice to say, his enthusiasm for cold weather had chilled dramatically.
The Fat Controller stood on the platform. On the horizon, a colossal engine emerged from the setting sun. Its black paint was shabby, and its puffs were deep and hoarse. It groaned to a halt, a line of trucks trailing behind. "Good evening," greeted the Fat Controller. "You're the replacement goods engine, I presume?" "That is correct, sir," replied the engine. "The regular diesel derailed in the yard. Wasn't keeping a proper lookout. But you know how self-importance gets in the way of some engines," he finished with a wink. "Indeed I do," chuckled the Fat Controller knowingly. "What is your name?" "Dudley, sir. A pleasure to traverse your rails." "Very good, Dudley. Please proceed to the shed. You'll be in good company with my engines." "Thank you for your hospitality, sir. I wish you a pleasant evening," Dudley finished, puffing slowly away. The engines welcomed the newcomer warmly. Soon they were laughing and chatting like schoolchildren. "A pity my stay is but a temporary one," Dudley sighed. "You're blessed to have a controller who realizes your value. My days are numbered on the other railway." "A grim inevitability," shuddered Gordon. "Inevitable, my tender! We could change that," replied James. "Oh, I could never impose such a thing," insisted Dudley. "Besides," sighed Henry, "the Fat Controller's just purchased Oliver and... Ah, here's our other new acquisition now." Bear backed down next to Dudley. "Hello," he smiled. "I'm Bear. Lovely to meet you." "Mutual, I'm sure," Dudley responded, unenthusiastically. "Will you be staying long, or—" "I say," Dudley interrupted, ignoring Bear. "Rumour has it that one of you recently rescued 2 failed diesels." "That was me," Henry beamed with pride, and began telling the story. Bear was stunned. "He gave me the cold buffer too," sighed Boko. "Living on the other railway likely hasn't painted up diesels in the best light." "Aye," agreed Donald. "Don't take it to heart, Bear. Dougie and I needed time to come around. You'll find you're a good sort." "I hope," Bear conceded, though he couldn't help feeling hurt.